So in this module, I really want to focus on the importance of thinking about the individual that you're designing with and for. And we talk about co-design, GEDSI principles, and targeted universalism. At the end of this, you'll get a sense of the importance of equity and inclusion. You'll know and be familiar with the concepts of targeted universalism, GEDSI principles, and design thinking. You'll come across and be aware of an analysis tool you can use when you think about GEDSI, and you'll think about GEDSI with your positionality. You'll be able to understand why gender equity, disability, and social inclusion GEDSI is important for design thinking and innovation, become familiar with some key concepts and the policy approach of targeted universalism, and you really will have reflected on your own identity and positionality in this context. So, what is inclusion and why is it important? Well, everybody, each and every one of us, possesses a variety of traits such as age, gender, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, and disability. Certain individuals may face challenges in fully engaging with community activities or accessing services due to these unique traits or situations. And so, when we are engaging in design thinking, we need to have an understanding of the diverse needs that different people have, because it ensures that the solutions we design are more inclusive and adaptable for everyone, regardless of their background or abilities. Equity is about ensuring fair access to opportunities, resources, and support. And it focuses on addressing systematic inequalities and accommodating individual needs. And inclusion is about creating an environment where diverse individuals feel welcomed, valued, and are able to fully participate without barriers. And that is what we want. There are many groups at risk of exclusion, and different groups may be vulnerable to exclusion in various ways, depending on different factors such as social, economic, and geographic conditions. Here's just a few. Of course, Indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, LGBTQIA plus individuals, women and girls, older people, people with limited education or are displaced or live in remote areas. These groups are members of the community. They have equal human rights, including the right to participate in community and political life, and they have unique strengths and perspectives beyond being labelled as vulnerable. When we think about this, we need to think about, and I like to think about the concept of targeted universalism. Okay, this is a wonderful approach that says that the policy goal should be universal, something that we all want, but the strategy to get there should be targeted because we're all situated differently. So we're not all in the same situation, but all trying to get to the same universal goal. And I'm going to play this reflection from John A. Powell, who coined this term and is a leader in this space.
What happened in terms of the application of equity, people started focusing on disparities. So in practice, equity became closing disparities between groups. And so the benchmark in terms of the goal was to get whatever the favored group has, or to close the gap between the less favored and more favored group. That does a couple of things. First of all, put groups in competition. And because oftentimes the assumption is in order to get there, we have to take from the more favored group and give to the less favored group. In racial terms, that means oftentimes taking from whites or white men and giving to women and people of color. And not surprising, the favored group, or whoever is designated the favored group, oftentimes object. And part of the objection is they're still holding on to the first concept of equality. But secondly, oftentimes they're not doing all that well themselves. Take, for example, the suicide rate. By some recent data, the suicide rate among white men is higher than African Americans. There's still a gap. The gap is we need to have more black men killing themselves in order to close that gap. Of course, no one wants that, right? That's not what we want. The goal is not just to get what white men have or white people have. And in some cases, they may not even be a favorite group. The goal is to do what? The goal is to end suicide. So the goal should be designated without it being necessarily attached to what any particular group has. And that takes us to targeted universalism. So targeted universalism says the goal is universal. It's something we all want, what Gary just laid out beautifully. And the strategy to get us there has to be targeted because we're situated differently. So we're not all in the same situation. We're all trying to get to the universal goal. So that's the between targeted universalism and equity. Targeted universalism is equity 2.0. It's basically saying we're trying to give everybody what they need to thrive and prosper in our country. And yes, whites may be close to that, and they may be close to that for a number of reasons, including the history of slavery and Jim Crow. But oftentimes they're not there. And then when you disaggregate whites, you see whites are distributed. So think about this. Let's say we're in a room, Gary and I are in a room, and a white person and Bill Gates is in the room, or Elon Musk. The disparity in terms of wealth in that room racially is huge. But I dare say, if Bill Gates left, that disparity shrinks substantially.
And I want us to just briefly watch this video that talks about how targeted universalism can be applied.
What is the most effective and sustainable policy response to problems in our society? Universal approaches are widely used in order to package policies for broad appeal. Universal policies such as Social Security and minimum wage provide the same benefits or minimum protections to everyone, regardless of status or group membership. But by treating everyone the same, universal approaches can't root out group-based discrimination. It may actually deepen inequality between groups rather than reduce it. And by providing benefits or protections to everyone, resources that could be targeted to groups worse off instead flow to those who are better off. In contrast to universalism, targeted approaches are commonly used. Targeted policies provide benefits or protections based on group membership or status. SNAP, the food stamp program, conditions benefits on income level. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires public accessibility for disabled groups. And affirmative action focuses on historically disadvantaged groups. Targeted approaches are vulnerable to the critique that they unfairly favor constituent groups over the public good by directing resources to marginalized groups who are already subjected to unfair stereotypes. But universal and targeted approaches are false choices. There is a third way, targeted universalism. Targeted universalism means setting universal goals that can be achieved through targeted approaches. This approach targets the various needs of each group while reminding us that we are all part of the same social fabric. This can be accomplished by following 5 steps. First, set a universal goal. For example, 100% proficiency in 8th grade math. Second, measure how the overall population fares relative to the universal goal. In this example, we might discover that only 80% of 8th graders are proficient in 8th grade math. Third, measure the performance of population segments relative to the universal goal. So although 80% of all 8th graders are proficient, we might find that only 70% of Latinx students are proficient. Fourth, understand how structures and other factors support or impede groups' progress toward the universal goal. For Latinx students, classroom instruction materials and lessons designed for English speakers may impede learning, including math proficiency. Finally, implement targeted strategies so that each and every group can achieve the universal goal based upon their needs and circumstances. This may take the form of ESL-specific math tutoring for our Latinx students, while another group may require a completely different strategy to achieve the same universal goal. Targeted universalism rejects a blanket universal, which may be indifferent to the reality that different groups are situated differently relative to the institutions and resources of society. By aspiring toward shared universal goals, targeted universalism empowers targeted strategies capable of achieving those goals while moving us beyond concerns over disparities alone and toward our highest aspirations for all.
So I think there's a lot to think about when a lot of opportunities in targeted universalism, especially when we think about GEDSI. GEDSI stands for Gender Equality, Disability and Social Inclusion. And these principles are often applied in various contexts, such as project planning and implementation, policymaking, organizational practice, education systems, and healthcare service. The goal of thinking with GEDSI in mind is to create more inclusive, diverse, and equitable environments and outcomes across all sectors of a society. So, a brief overview of each principle. First, gender equality. It focuses on ensuring equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities for people of all genders. It addresses and aims to eliminate gender-based discrimination and promotes equal participation in social, economic, and political spheres. Disability, of course, is about including and accommodating people with disabilities in all areas of society. Promotes accessibility, equal opportunities, and removes barriers that prevents people with disabilities from fully participating. Social inclusion is about creating conditions where all individuals and groups can participate fully, regardless of their background, identity, or circumstances. It's critical that we do not leave marginalized groups behind. There's a continuum of GEDSI approaches, okay? And we really want to focus on transformative approaches. That is where we are tackling the root causes of unequal access and participation and empowering marginalized people to become change agents and leaders. That's the focus of what we want. We definitely do not want to be exploitative or neutral or blind, and even accommodating is not the ideal. We want to really empower and enable marginalized people to become their full potential. Incorporating GEDSI principles into design thinking helps us ensure that the solutions we develop are accessible, fair, and relevant to all users, especially those from marginalized groups. And this, of course, leads to more innovative, sustainable, and equitable outcomes that truly addresses the needs of everybody. So when it comes to GEDSI principles in design thinking, when do you think we should incorporate them into the GEDSI approach, into the design thinking process? You're right, at all stages, at every element. GEDSI is part of design thinking. Design thinking, can help us think about GEDSI in a different way. You might want to try and conduct a GEDSI analysis to inform the process, identify outcomes, and develop strategies. A GEDSI analysis is where you systematically look at gender, equality, disability, and social inclusions within a project, and you try and identify the barriers, opportunities, and strategies to achieve equitable outcomes for all groups. So what makes a good GEDSI analysis? You can link your analysis to a framework that focuses on this. You can identify equity barriers and explore some targeted and integrated solutions. And you can really think about intersectionality and knowledge that multiple identities shape varied experiences and needs. You think about the scope. You might want to think about what's the key important issues in your context, in your sector, in your population group, and really make sure that the data is good. Okay, ideally, any kind of secondary data you use is less than 3 years old and really important, really related to the project context. Okay, you can engage with local partners. Of course, for the do no harm approach, use both surveys and interviews, quantitative and qualitative methods to identify measurable gaps and inequalities, and really try to use participatory methods so there's equal involvement from all groups and that you're really focused on engaging hard to reach populations. And of course, you need to partner with people who have GEDSI expertise. Think about looking at your data. It's split by these factors and it has different insights, and really make sure that any kind of initiative that you come up with, think about if there's any intended and unintended impacts on different groups and try and come up with strategies to mitigate any potentially negative impacts. Okay. And really think about action, the resources needed, and evidence-based strategies. Okay. There's a good call here, a good tool that you can use from KUFA, okay? And this tool provides a guide to why, when, and how to conduct a GEDSI analysis, and it's worth looking at. You need to. It walks through a stakeholder analysis, and it's got an action-oriented framework which asks questions and prompts informed response plans. So GEDSI is core to design because when we think about design, we're thinking about people. We want to co-design and engage people with lived experience, end users. People with lived and living experience is critical. But this does take time and effort and resources, and trauma and personal and systematic issues sometimes mean that it's hard for certain people to engage in your project. So you've really got to deploy care, respect, empathy, think about any kind of power imbalances. And if it's sensitive issues, be aware that the coding team or the research or project team might experience a kind of vicarious trauma. So just be mindful always. Reflect on your own positionality, okay? Think about any power dynamics or power imbalances. Think about always from a place of empathy and inclusion. Address any kind of biases that you might have, and reflecting on positionality helps us to recognize and mitigate these, and really think about ethical and universal design and ethical practices that prioritize inclusion, respect, and social justice. So you can check in. Is this have you been informed by GEDSI analysis, thinking about different user groups? Have you engaged with diverse voices and diverse GEDSI stakeholders? Are the objectives of the project clear and specific? Are the results action-orientated? Really clear about who they're going to benefit? Any key barriers addressed? Okay. Are the outcomes equitable? Okay. And have evidence-based strategies and policies being used? Inclusion is a process and an outcome. And if you think about some of the phrasing that we've talked about and the approaches we've talked about, target the universal is a really good way to address the specific barriers faced by marginalised groups. We need to engage and hear and amplify diverse voices. Integrate a GEDSI approach and analysis into your project, and really reflect on your positionality that can help determine blind spots. There's a number of different resources here that you can engage with as needed. And remember, it's really important to consider GEDSI in your design thinking project. You might want to look at the reflection activity, and which is in the additional learning materials, which will ask you to reflect on GEDSI principles and how they might apply to the work you do. Okay. Good luck.